This week, I'm going to be making a 3D shadowbox comic book cover out of one of my favorite covers, Hulk 181. I'll do that using Photoshop.
And my mitts.
Really, it takes a bunch of tools like X-Acto blades, rulers, spray adhesive, saws, not just
my mitts.
Cover I chose for the video this week is Hulk 181. It's the first appearance of Wolverine. This comic is very popular right now, and I'm lucky enough to own 2 of them. I don't want to damage my copies by displaying them, so I'm going to make a 3D shadowbox version of the cover that I can display. Here is the process of making that shadowbox and display piece. I start in Photoshop. First thing I had to do was go through that cover and take every element of the cover and cut it out into its requisite parts. So I probably spent an hour or 2 cutting out each of the individual parts, and then here, once I've gotten them all cut out, I go in and start to paint back the backgrounds that are missing from some of those. The final image of the cover is obviously a 2D image, and I would like to turn it into a 3D thing. So what I need to do is isolate every element and go through and paint back in the parts that would have been overlapping in the 2D image. You can see I take out chains, I take out some of the foreground elements, the background elements, just depending on where it is. This Hulk is an excellent example because I had to go through and basically recreate everything that was there underneath Wolverine's fist. So he gets a new jaw, teeth, new shading, everything just had to be redone from the ground up. And you'll see that several places in this image where I just have to recreate the information that was underneath the 2D image. Most of my recreation I do by just painting things in. I choose the color from the image itself that is the closest to the color I need, just with my color picker. And then in the other parts that I change, I use a lot of clone stamp. So I take the clone stamp tool and I just use that to recreate a part of the image that's already there. That worked excellent on text. But things like the characters, I had to physically go in and paint the anatomy that was missing. The background of these mountains by far took the longest of anything in this image. They're the most covered up. So I spend a lot of time just going in and really nailing those colors that are there. Again, like I said, I pick the color that is there from the background, and then I decide what I think it would have done if the image had been finished without foreground elements in it. So if it were just a background image. Once I get the colors in, I then go through and do the line work. My main objective is really just matching the style that was already there by the original artist. Once all the coloring and patching is complete, you can see I go through and test every individual element, and then it's time to start putting everything on pages so I can send them to a printer to have everything printed on 11 by 17 cardstock. I find cardstock is the best for making any type of three-dimensional model. So you can see I do my layout here, and then I'll send it off to the printer, and then I can start cutting things out physically. All told, I end up with 4 pages, a red background, the characters, the titles, and then the background pieces, as you can see here. I take each of those and I cut them out. Just a preliminary cutout so that I can then spray adhese them onto various types of mat board, and in this case I used comic book backer boards just because they're easier to cut out. Usually I would use 3 layers of cardstock all laminated together, but I find the comic book backer boards are the same size in terms of thickness as those 3 layers of cardstock, and just as easy to cut out. The goal here is to be able to cut things out with one pass of a sharp X-Acto blade, versus if I used mat board for everything, it would take multiple passes, up to 3 or 4. And with something like this, where you're going to be making thousands of cuts, that just eats away so much time. With everything spray adhesed on and left to set completely, I then go back and cut everything out one more time, just to save myself so I don't have to move big pieces of paper around. I do another preliminary cut, and then I go in and really start to hit details of everything. I want each of these pieces cut out as exactly as I can possibly cut them out. And you'll see that process here. I skip a lot of it because this was honestly about 6 hours of me meticulously cutting out tiny little pieces of cardstock. I think all told I used about 24 X-Acto blades. I used to do scenic design for theater, and this is the exact process you would use to make a 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch or 1/2 inch scenic model. So it just brought back all kinds of memories from working in theater here. And my carpal tunnel, because my mitts are just not what they used to be. Once everything is cut out, it's time to go back. I use an alcohol marker, and I trace along all of the edges with a black or a red, just something to make this stand back into the background. Without this, you would see these harsh white lines that go around the edges, depending on which angle you looked at the model from. So I just make sure that all of these edges are covered with a black. This does have some kind of danger associated with it, and you'll see later the alcohol markers tend to run a little bit, so if you don't use them super quickly and confidently, you can bleed black ink into your finished piece, and then you have to remake some of them. Here you can see I had to remake some of the Wolverine letters, just because I went a little too slowly and tried to be a little more meticulous than I wanted or really needed to be. So I ended up having to redo these letters here. So here you can see I just moved through quickly and confidently so that I don't ruin them a second time. Also, this is why I print 2 copies of everything that I needed printed, just in case there was a mistake somewhere along the way. I could have another copy and not last minute be trying to fix something. Finally, I wanted to show this because this is me using a thick piece of mat board, so probably double thickness of a normal piece of mat board. And you can see some of these lines I have to cut and recut up to 15 times with a sharp brand new X-Acto blade just to make it through. Once everything is cut out, it's time to start assembling things. First thing I like to do is kind of dry fit everything together. This way I can see how it fits, make sure there's nothing that has drastically gone wrong, and then I can start to space things out and do a final glue up. I used a couple different types of spacers here. First, I use 1/4 inch foam core. This is black foam core just so it doesn't stand out or become a distraction. And then I use pieces of double thickness mat board and cardstock. I just try to give myself several options to space things out and get myself some distance from the background. Committing to gluing the first piece is always the hardest because you've put in a lot of work, and I think I've worked for 9 or 10 hours up to this point just to get these pieces ready. And then once I glue something, if I do something wrong, I ruin it and then I have to start all over again. So now that that first piece is glued down, everything else starts to go much quicker, and I'm much more confident in what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. The title is one of the things I'm most nervous about because a lot of things in this image are anchored from that title. So you can see I do the K first because it touches the top edge, and then I go through and do the other letters on a straight edge aligned to that original K. So I get it where I like it, I glue the first one down, and then I start to glue everything down from there once I'm sure it will all fit and match the original image. With most of my title and background elements done, I start to move into some of the foreground elements. I think about this like a Photoshop composition. Oh, and there's my cat. Likes to run through whenever I'm working. I think about this like a Photoshop composition in which I'm arranging layers on top of each other. So I look at the original image and I see what overlaps what. And then I can take my 3D pieces and actually recreate those overlaps. Here's another Wolverine title. These titles, like I said, just had to be lined up meticulously, and here you can see I have to get out a pair of tweezers just to make sure everything is placed exactly where I want it, and it makes it a lot easier to handle things. Now it's down to the final steps of putting in the main characters. So spacing these out was the most difficult because they needed a variety of different types of spacers. They were stacked on top of so many other background elements. So I plan where those spacers need to go. I go through, cut out a bunch of them, make new spacers where needed, and then I throw them on the backs and move on to getting this piece finished up. The final thing that's needed for this composition are the swooshes from the motion of Wolverine swinging and Hulk swinging at each other, and the chains that Wolverine has broken out of. You'll see the chains were really actually kind of difficult to put all in place. They're really tiny and just needed to be placed kind of exactly to fit into the composition. So those were the last things I did. And here we have it, the finished three-dimensional comic book cover. I really like the way this one turned out, and I really wanted to make sure that for the final display of it, I had a shadow box to put it into. Now it's about 11 by 17, but not quite. So I had an old 11 by 17 frame that wasn't a shadow box laying around, and I figured I could just convert that to make a shadow box for the piece. So in the next part of the video, I make a custom shadow box. Here's the final piece, all finished up and mounted in its shadow box. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching the video. If you like the kind of content I'm making, please feel free to show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. If you have any suggestions for future videos, go ahead and leave a comment below. And as always, have a good day.